So, a few years back, when I was doing those videos breaking down the major battles and offensives of the Clone Wars, we talked a lot about major hyperspace lanes. They affected the way the galaxy worked, but we haven't really talked about what a hyperspace lane is and why it's so significant. So I figured today we could talk a little about the logistics of hyperspace and what hyperspace lanes are and why they're so important. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, we hear this mentioned a lot in Star Wars, particularly in sort of the less central elements of the canon, things like TV shows and books, where hyperspace lanes play a really substantial role. Even back in the days of the Old Republic, where hyperspace lanes were still being sort of figured out, they were crucial to the expansion around the galaxy, and as far as the modern day, in terms of the Star Wars universe, they play a major role in moving goods and people around the Star Wars galaxy. So let's dive into how these hyperspace lanes work, but first we have to talk about how hyperspace works, because that plays a big role in the way the hyperspace lanes are used. So, I'm not going to get into the scientific aspects of hyperspace because most of it's just technobabble anyway, but one of the big rules of hyperspace that is very consistent throughout Star Wars, and we see prominently in things like the interdictor class vessels of the Galactic Empire's Navy, that most hyperdrives, if not all hyperdrives, have a built-in mechanism to pull a vessel out of hyperspace automatically if it's at risk of collision with a larger gravitational body, mostly using a system that detects gravitational fields and draws the ship out of hyperspace as an emergency precaution. Now, this is utilized by the Empire and their interdictors to create fields where hyperspace travel is infeasible, but this is really designed to avoid natural obstacles like planets and stars, which would be catastrophic to hit at the speeds used in hyperspace. So, while we're familiar with that from interdictors, its primary use was avoiding natural bodies, and that's exactly what hyperlanes are. Now, if you're going to move from point A to point B in hyperspace, you need a pretty clear shot where there's no natural stellar bodies. And if there is, you need to adjust course to go around them. And stellar bodies are constantly moving. When we look at space in real life, it's not a very static element. It's moving in its own way at all times. And so, if you were trying to find a route where there was little chance of straying into the gravitational field of a star or a planet, that would prove to be challenging over vast distances like crossing an entire galaxy. That is where the hyperspace lanes come in. These hyperspace lanes, which stretch across the Star Wars galaxy, are stretches of space where there are no obstacles, natural or otherwise, that could impede a ship traveling through hyperspace. These lanes were usually natural, just areas of space with nothing in them, or channels through which ships could move clearly, and if something was to stray into those channels, they could be cleared out through technological means, but most of these channels are natural. Now, we do know that some hyperspace lanes were not natural. Some of them were artificial, and we'll talk about those in a sec, but ultimately, that's what a hyperspace lane is. If you're just here for that answer, it's a stretch of space with no natural obstacles that would pull a ship out of hyperspace or pose a collision risk that a ship can easily travel through hyperspace along without worrying about a collision. But what if you need to move goods rapidly and efficiently and there are no hyperspace lanes? Well, generally you then have to do a bunch of short point-to-point jumps that's much longer and much more tedious on both the crew and the spacecraft, that is just inefficient. So it's easier to move along these hyperspace lanes and travel to destinations right along these lanes. And if you look at the Star Wars galaxy, most major worlds, most key locations that were sites of major battles or major trade hubs are along these hyperspace lanes for that exact reason. But let's say you want to go somewhere and there is no hyperspace lane, but you need a rapid method of moving supplies or anything really in between those two locations. Well, this is exactly the problem that the designers and builders of the Grand Army of the Republic faced in the immediate prelude to the Battle of Geonosis before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. They were building a massive army on Kamino that had to be kept in absolute secrecy, but they needed to supply and outfit this army with vehicles, armor, and equipment, and they had to be able to get those vehicles, armor, and equipment from the manufacturers, which were not located on Kamino, to Kamino in great numbers and in relative secrecy. So what they ended up doing was actually creating their own hyperspace lane by moving celestial bodies and shifting things around to be able to use a much quicker hyperspace route from Rathana, where the army's equipment was being manufactured, to Camino, where the army itself was being bred. That allowed for a smoother transportation of goods from Rathana to Camino, and allowed the Grand Army of the Republic, the clone troopers, to train with the equipment they would use on the battlefield in the early days of their sort of development to make them more and more familiar with the weapons they would be using when they reached maturity and went into combat. But all in all, these hyperspace lanes really are what connect the Star Wars galaxy, and they influence so much of Star Wars' history, particularly from a military aspect. After all, military campaigns tend to follow these hyperspace routes because they're easy to move along, they're valuable trade routes, and they're crucial to the logistical operations of either side of a military conflict. We see this a lot during the Clone Wars, for example. And to utilize these hyperspace lanes, the ship needs a propulsion system and a hyperdrive, and if you'd like to learn about the propulsion system on a ship like the one behind me, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, I'll leave a link up here to my video breaking down the engineering sides of an ISD so you can get an idea of how a ship like this moves around the galaxy. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments what you think of hyperspace lanes as a concept to begin with. Does it make sense that these channels are needed to really move goods around, or do you think a vessel should easily be able to do point-to-point since space is vast and mostly empty anyway? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.